713 to the 281, yeah, I'm riding. Why they on me? Why they on me? I'm flying, sipping low key. I'm sipping low key and Onyx, rider, rider. I get those goosebumps every time.
Newcastle United.
I get those goosebumps every time. I need the hype, throw that to the side. I get those goosebumps every time. Yeah, when you're not around, we can throw that to the side. I get those goosebumps every time.
Pop the mugs. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Loaded Mag NUFC, the fully loaded transfer show. We've got a little bit of a special for you tonight because there's been news. There has been news. Yoane Wissa, there has been a bid by Newcastle United to Brentford for the 28-year-old Congolese international. We're going to get into that all tonight, and we've got a special guest, Ben Jacobs, who's just waiting to come on to talk it all through. But first of all, Chris, how are you, fella?
I'm good, mate. Good, mate. Really, really pleased to have Ben back on the show. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know we've got Ben for a very, very limited time. But Pete, how are you doing, mate? You good?
All good with me. Living it up. Summer holidays as expected. And Daz is on holiday, just landed. So may well join us, may not. We'll see on that one. But make sure you get those likes up and all that good stuff as we welcome in our fantastic guest. Welcome in. Give Me Sports senior correspondent, Ben Jacobs. How you doing?
Good evening, guys. Great to be back. How are you?
Very, very good. Great to have you with us, Ben. It's been a while in the making. We have been talking and trying to get you on, but you are extremely busy this summer, covering lots of different teams on lots of different transfers. So we are absolutely delighted to have you on for the short period that we do. So we're going to get straight into it, Ben. We're not going to mess around with it. And we have talked about the main talking point tonight is this man, Yoane Wissa. Could he be wearing the black and white stripes of Newcastle United this summer? We don't know for sure, but it's looking like there's a possibility. And look, Ben, we'll go through the storyboard really, really quickly. It started with sort of Sammy Mokbel mentioning that there was a situation with Yoane Wissa leaving the training camp in Portugal. We then got yourself saying that he is keen on a move away. It did then spiral into a bid that we hear is rejected. We'll get your thoughts on that in just a second. And that we are potentially, as you mentioned, looking to bid again at that point. So with Yoane Wissa at that stage, with a potential rejection, can you just shed a little bit of light on the Yoane Wissa situation with Newcastle? How did it come about and where are we right now?
Yeah, I think they've had Wissa on their radar for quite some time. Obviously, they've looked at other attack-minded targets that they've missed out on to other clubs. So the focus hasn't entirely been on the Brentford attacker all window, but definitely in the last kind of 10 days or so, there's been a real feeling from Newcastle that they need to move. And we've known for quite some time that Brentford's ideal preference is to not have a window where they lose Mbeumo and Wissa. And as a consequence, both Manchester United in placing that increased bid for Mbeumo that was successful in the end, and Newcastle and to an extent Spurs have got their skates on because everybody realises that the first one of Mbeumo and Wissa to go, which has proven to be Mbeumo, would be a little bit easier in terms of the club to club. However, what Brentford weren't anticipating is Wissa seeing Mbeumo get a chance and now pushing and agitating to leave. And that may change the complexion. I think if the player hadn't expressed a desire to leave the camp in Portugal and speak to Brentford about his future, then Brentford would have just cracked on, looked to spend the Mbeumo money, back a new manager in his first managerial gig, and that might have been that. But you've got a player that's making it very clear he doesn't want to sign a new deal at the moment anyway. He wants to play Champions League football. Because of his age, you can understand that. And that's given Newcastle and very possibly Spurs, if they choose to enter the race, some kind of encouragement. And my understanding is that Newcastle and Tottenham are two clubs that Wissa is open to joining. We're not getting a situation like with João Pedro, where as soon as Chelsea came along, player said, I only want to join Chelsea. We've got a player saying Newcastle and Tottenham, both big clubs, both with Champions League football. I know some Newcastle fans will feel like you might be at a disadvantage because of the Thomas Frank factor, but Spurs haven't bid yet. We'll have to wait and see whether that changes. So Newcastle are out there trying to get this deal done quickly now, knowing that they do have some player buy-in and personal terms will not be a problem. Then just in terms of the chronology, pretty much the day of the Manchester United final bid for Mbeumo, Newcastle made club-to-club contact with Wissa, and they decided that he was their leading target and naturally is the kind of fit within Eddie Howe's 4-3-3. It's a part of the field where Eddie Howe needs to strengthen. He's versatile. Howe likes players that can play in two different positions. So they decided to move. And then in the last 48 hours, there was a £25 million bid that has been rejected. I'm told that was verbal. And then as I broke today, a formal bid of likely 30 million or above is anticipated in the coming hours or days. And then we have to understand whether or not Brentford see that as competitive, because when Nottingham Forest had a bid rejected for under 25 million, they were told you need double the money or walk away. And this is the slight point of difference between Brentford and suitors, because clubs at the moment are treating Wissa like he's got 1 year left. Whereas from Brentford's point of view, they maintain there is this club-only option, so the player can't veto it. And if they want to, prior to anything happening or any negotiations advancing, they can just extend his contract. So their valuation is based on a player that has 2 years left, even though at the moment his contract is into its final 12 months. And Newcastle are quite optimistic here. They don't think the number is going to be 50 million. Some sources say the number might be closer to 40 million. One or two suggest 30 or 35 in the right structure might even be good enough. But before we can get to that point, and even if Newcastle increase their offer, something big has to happen in the next 24, 48 hours. And that's talks that I'm told are going to start tomorrow with Wissa and Brentford to basically get on the same page. So Brentford are obviously going to try and just settle him down and maybe even offer him new terms. And at the same time, Wissa's trying to get Brentford to say, enter into selling mode, because he, like Mbeumo, deserves the chance to leave and play Champions League football. And after that meeting, my expectation is that both club and player will be on the same page. And if that page is an exit, then Newcastle will likely place this bid that I reported earlier, and then we'll wait and see whether they can wrap up the deal quickly.
You made a really good, a number of really good points there, and you've touched on the three things that I think all Newcastle United fans would want to know right now. You initially touched on the fact that Tottenham are in play here and the manager being in play, Thomas Frank. So I think you've maybe calmed a few nerves, because I think speaking to Newcastle United fans today, that was the concern. It was a concern that our Tottenham will end up getting him because, of Thomas Frank. But you're saying from your perspective that actually that may not be the case. I think both clubs are in play here, and we're the ones that have bid at this moment in time, and Tottenham have not. In addition to that, you've touched on the Wissa club situation with Brentford. Is that the reason why he's left the camp to go back to London? Because there was noises that he's gone back to London to maybe have those talks with Brentford. Is that why that's happening? And from your understanding, going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, that's my understanding, that he's left the camp to discuss his future. It doesn't guarantee an exit, but it obviously tells you that the player wants to discuss the possibility of leaving. And if he gets his way, he'll leave Brentford. But Brentford should be respected in this scenario. They were tough negotiators also with Manchester United. But my understanding is that the meeting between Wissa and Brentford will happen in the next day or two, and they will try and get on the same page. So Wissa either convincing Brentford to allow him to leave, or Brentford convincing Wissa to sign a new deal on improved terms. And then clubs will have more clarity. Regarding Tottenham, I think it's important to note that they are interested, and we certainly can't discount an approach, because it was the same chronology with João Pedro, where Newcastle were the only ones bidding. Chelsea were undecided. They'd ruled it out in May. They'd ruled it in June. They bid. and very quickly the player wanted to join. So it is quite a fluid situation, but the position where Wissa plays is more urgent for Newcastle than Spurs at this point. Now, some will argue if Son leaves because he can go from the left into a more central area, that Tottenham will want somebody to lead the line, to compete with Dominic Solanke, to play behind him and to get into wide areas as well. But in that behind the striker role, I think you've already got Mohamed Kudus, you've got James Maddison, you've got Son at the moment. They've signed Tell, who is a left-sided attacker. You've got plenty of options at Tottenham on the right as it stands. And although Wissa can simply lead the line, I think the kind of profile that Tottenham are really looking for is, in a nutshell, Morgan Gibbs-White. And I don't necessarily see Tottenham going big on Wissa if they have confidence still that Morgan Gibbs-White may come off. Now, at the time, it looked like Tottenham were going to trigger the release clause of Morgan Gibbs-White. Sources did say it could be Kudus, Morgan Gibbs-White and Yoane Wissa, simply because of how versatile Wissa is in where he plays. But this is going to be the key indication in the next hours, because Tottenham are either going to enter this race knowing they need to because Newcastle want to move fast, or alternatively, they're going to wait it out and see if they can get Morgan Gibbs over the line. And if Tottenham are silent for the next day or two whilst Newcastle move, then I think there is a very fair chance that they will move on to other targets. But we definitely can't discount a Tottenham bid. I certainly wouldn't bill it as Newcastle the only club in the race, but it is different to Mbeumo and Manchester United and very different to João Pedro and Chelsea, because in those cases, the players said very early, in the same way Victor Gyökeres did for Arsenal, we only want one club. Whereas right now, Wissa is saying he wants Champions League, he wants to leave Brentford, and he's open to either Newcastle United or Tottenham. Nottingham Forest shouldn't be entirely discounted from this story because they only placed a bid a couple of weeks ago. But I think as it stands, if Wissa had offers from all three, he would pick between Tottenham and Newcastle, and Nottingham Forest stand less percentage chance of success, providing that the other two suitors remain at the table.
Ben, what do you think about Newcastle's offer? I mean, there's a lot of people in the chat saying, 25 million feels a little bit low. Like, what's your stance on it? I know obviously Newcastle like to try and drive a hard bargain, but do you think that is a little bit low? And obviously it's kind of stung us in the recent past in the summer transfer window so far. Do you think that's a wise move from Newcastle, or do you think that we're just going to continue to do this similar process that we seem to do for all players at the moment?
Yeah, I think the first offer is never your final offer, or very rarely in the absence of a release clause or a clear valuation ballpark. And as a consequence, when you make this kind of offer, it's a point of conversation. It can help drive the move. The player becomes aware of your interest. And that's probably what's provoked the meeting that's going to take place over the next day or two. And therefore, I wouldn't view the offer as particularly binding or even necessarily one that Newcastle thought stood a chance of success. You lay down your marker because as we saw with Mbeumo, that Manchester United's first bid and last bid in terms of the fixed fee were 20 million apart. So if you come in too high to begin with, then maybe there's a danger that Brentford go higher and higher and higher. So a low ball bid is more a tactic or a point of conversation. And again, I come back to what I said before when I reported it today. The first offer, dismissed pretty much out of hand, was verbal. And my understanding is it was 24 or 48 hours ago, which is why when I reported today, I stressed the word formal and written. And I think once you go up a little bit from the Nottingham Forest bid, which is probably why Newcastle started there, you then give yourself a bit of slack and leeway to make your first formal bid that Newcastle may feel is going to be a bit more competitive. And there's a likelihood, I'm told, of success, depending on structure and payment terms, for at the lower end 30 million. Maybe that will be a shade too low. And at the more realistic side, 35 to 40 million. And then we wait and see whether Brentford then turn around and try and hike it up by another 20 million. But the point here is if it follows the same path as the Mbeumo deal, if you start at 25, maybe you resign yourself to getting Wissa with 2 years left if you count the 1 year extension at 45. If you come in at 30, 35, maybe they go Elanga was 55 and Cunha was 62.5 and Brian Mbeumo was 71, and they take all the stats, even though this is a slightly older player than some of those examples given. and suddenly you get like a 10 million tax on the deal. So it feels quite smart to me for Newcastle to declare their interest only slightly north of a rejected bid from Nottingham Forest. And then if negotiations progress and they have to go a little bit higher, maybe they'll end up still getting the player for the rough ballpark that they're thinking, which I'm told is between 30 and 40 million. But obviously Brentford may be arguing it should be between 40 and 50 million. So this again is why the talks that are going to take place between the player and Brentford are vital, because if they can get on the same page, then I would imagine the possibility of finding a package in Newcastle's ballpark is more feasible. If they can't get on the same page, then it's the kind of deal that you might have to pay above the odds for. And that's when you start thinking a Newcastle or a Spurs might just walk away, because as soon as you don't have club and player both happy with the plan, the club is always going to say, we want to keep the player, you're going to have to pay a premium. And that's where all these figures like Mbumo or Cunha starting with a 6 will start to come into play. So I think the first thing that will give us the true clarity is that meeting. And then after that meeting, or perhaps even on the morning of that meeting, my expectation, as I've reported, is that Newcastle will place a formal bid.
One last thing from me, Ben, because I know we've got to let you go. Alexander Isak, I'm going to ask you this just because obviously it's hot topic at the moment. There's lots of noise around Alexander Isak at this moment in time. There was talk today. One of your co-workers, Alex Crook, wrote a piece around Alexander Isak wanting £300,000 a week. There was also some comments tonight about him training on his own and needing to train on his own because of potential injury. Just real quick thoughts before we let you go on Alexander Isak and that situation.
Yeah, I think Alexander Isak has had a very eventful few days, not playing in pre-season, not being put in the stands. It was down to easing him into the first few days of pre-season. But then post-match, it was down to speculation. And then Newcastle clarified their comments by speaking to sources anyway, and said what he meant by that was not to have Isak in the stands watching, because people would speculate and it wouldn't be fair to have the cameras on him. But obviously Howe's pre-match and post-match comments don't quite marry. So he doesn't play, and then mysteriously is training alone. And that is down, according to Newcastle sources, to a thigh issue, which came and went because he had a scan, it was clear, and then he was back again training, still alone. So if we take Newcastle at face value, Alexander Isak is not for sale. He had an injury scare. He's fine. And pre-season goes on as normal. And if that is all true, then you would expect tomorrow and the next day and the day after to see Isak in group training. And you would expect him to be involved in the next pre-season friendly. But when you add it all up, it's mighty coincidental that Liverpool make an inquiry, Saudi make an inquiry, the agency that represent Isak did an interview with a Saudi paper and said he's close to deciding what his next step is. All the whilst Newcastle would love to tie Isak down, whilst Liverpool and Al Hilal would love to sign Isak. And at the same time as all this is going on with a lot of noise, he's training alone, precautionary, and he's not playing in pre-season. So 2 and 2 either makes 4, and there's something to this Isak story, or 2 and 2 in a transfer window makes 4 million, and there's nothing to this Isak story. And we have to be respectful to Newcastle United. Their position is clear. Alexander Isak is not for sale. But I, like you, Pete, am a Leicester fan. And you will remember Wesley Fofana.
Segued that in. I like that.
You remember Wesley Fofana was not for sale, not for sale, not for sale, publicly, privately, for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then he agitated and suddenly he was a Chelsea player. So I think it is a fluid situation. My understanding is there is a number that Isak will be sold for. It's just whether it's this window, whether it's January or whether it's next summer. And it has to come to a head, because there's only so many times that Eddie Howe can be asked about it. There's only so many times that Newcastle will want to have this conversation. There's only so many times that Newcastle will want to be in recruitment meetings or speaking to other players who will also ask them, is Isak staying or going? If Wissa's a lead striker, Is he competing with Isak? Is he playing behind Isak? Is the formation changing? Players are going to want to know, as well as agents, as well as suitors, and most importantly, Newcastle United fans. So I think we're at an extreme scenario now. This is my read of the situation, where there is a possibility of an exit, because we know that Newcastle made an inquiry. Liverpool made an inquiry. So there's clearly a push from suitors, and you can ignore that as much as you like. And it was definitely battered when I exclusively revealed that Liverpool hadn't given up, that Liverpool would try, because everyone, obviously, being passionate about Newcastle United, doesn't like the prospect of an exit, and they don't want to hear that there might be an exit, and they want to believe Darren Eales' public words and Yasser Al-Rumayyan's backing that this is just not a player that Newcastle United will sell. But there is a push from people to see whether that resolve is genuine. And then at the other extreme, there's a firm desire of Newcastle to end all of this and get Alexander Isak to sign a new deal. And I'm not so sure that there can be a middle ground. I think 6 months ago, my feeling was, speaking to sources, that Newcastle didn't really care, because if they got Champions League football, Isak's really well paid as it is, and he's contracted until 2028. So Newcastle hold all the cards. And 6 months ago, that was my firm understanding, that even if he doesn't sign a new deal, even if somebody bids a British transfer record, Newcastle can just say, we've got Champions League, and he's well contracted and he's well paid. But I think the player's head has been turned. That's my feeling. And I think within Newcastle, they know that. And to turn the head back, you've either got to reward him with a new deal, potentially with some kind of guarantee that he can still go in a year or 2 years, or seasons without Champions League football. Or alternatively, you have to turn a desire not to sell for, we'd rather not sell, but there is a price. And that's the two extremes I think we're at. Number one, Newcastle don't want to sell. Number two, they'd love him to sign a new deal. Number three, they'll engage with him over a new deal. Or number four, at the right number, they might have to consider it now, because it would be crazy money, incredible money, maybe even £150 million. And if the player's head is really turned, there's not much that you can kind of do in that scenario. So now we have to wait and see whether Liverpool return, because they've got Hugo Ekitike. I don't think Isak is going to go to Saudi. I'd be staggered if he went to Al Hilal. That's just my personal opinion. All respect to Al Hilal. You'll know I'm Saudi correspondent for TalkSport. So if Al Hilal come calling and offer him crazy money and he's turned by that, then of course you would have to say it's all just down to the lucrative riches on offer, plus the fact he obviously would buy into Saudi being a developing market. And some might say that it's kind of PIF negotiating with PIF, and they'd almost rather push him to Saudi and take the money than they would push him to Newcastle and take the money. And there might be some sort of conspiracy type theory in that. But at this stage, I think there's a lot of people kind of jumping the gun, and there's a lot of noise. And all I've ever really reported is Newcastle want to keep Isak, and Liverpool will push for Isak, and Isak would be open to that move if the clubs agree a fee. And that's kind of gone round on a loop in my reporting. The only thing that's changed is that 3 months ago when I broke it, it was dismissed. 1 month ago when I repeated it, it was dismissed. And then when Newcastle United went for Ekitike, Liverpool showed their hand before also bidding for Ekitike. And now it's clear that Liverpool haven't given up. And that's where we stand. And right now, I think the next step will be, are we going to see Isak in training? And if we are, I would be expecting Newcastle United to shout and scream about it and do what other clubs do sometimes and stick it all over social media and show him smiling, maybe even have someone from the club do an off-season interview and back up Darren Eales' comments to make it public knowledge that those comments haven't changed. And at the same time, the next pre-season game, Isak should be in the squad. But if we get told that this precautionary scan on a thigh injury that is clear is actually fine, and we still don't see him in group training, and we still don't see him in the next pre-season game, then I think you have to add up all the little things that have happened and say there's too many clues for this to be only a coincidence. And that's when there'll be this period or window of opportunity where I think somebody will be able to make a formal bid for Alexander Isak. And then once again, I come back to what I said before. British transfer record has all manner of different extremes. It can be 1 million over the current British transfer record, and I think it would be rejected out of hand. It could be 130 million. Maybe that stands a chance. It might be 150 million. Or the other theory is that Saudi come bidding with crazy money, and that becomes the market valuation, and then everyone has to match that, and that might actually help Newcastle, because this happened with Kylian Mbappe, where he was falling out with PSG. Real didn't want to pay the money for Mbappe. There was a Saudi bid. The Saudi bid was world record. Even though PSG were willing to sell Kylian Mbappe for 150 million, the Saudi bid, I think, was 300 million euros or thereabouts. So why did they double the number? Well, they doubled the number because it's good headlines, it's a show bid, and it helps everybody, because then the market valuation raises. And if anyone truly wanted Mbappe, they would have had to go a little bit higher or a lot higher to match the Saudi bid. And I can see a scenario where Saudi bid, knowing they don't stand a chance for Isak, but they bid at 200 million. And then anyone else that wants Isak this summer has to match that or walk away. And that's not an unthinkable possibility as well. So I appreciate that these are just scenarios and we are speaking about hypotheticals, but the situation with Isak right now is crystal clear. He's training alone because Newcastle say he was injured and not because he was being separated from the group. Newcastle insists that it was always the plan to rest him and Joe Linton from the opening game of pre-season. So I would just encourage everyone, and it's the same in my reporting as well, I'm trying to keep it as measured as possible, to wait a few days, because if Newcastle's position is genuine, and we have to respect that and assume it is, then Isak will be back in group training tomorrow. They'll photograph it. They'll celebrate it. He'll be smiling and he'll be in the next pre-season lineup. If he isn't, there's only so long Newcastle can keep this not for sale, everything's fine narrative alive. Because if more time passes, we might be entering Wissa territory where Isak says, I want to speak to the club about my future. And at that point, it can kind of be the beginning of the end, or you've got to give him what he wants to sign a new deal. So I come back to what I said before, that I foresee two scenarios at either extreme. He either signs a new deal quickly and is rewarded further, or he has to leave the club. I don't know if it can continue, even with Isak well contracted as is, simply because of the volume of interest and the fact that the player's head appears to be turned.
It's an interesting one, really, really interesting, and good sort of open sort of perspective there from yourself, Ben, on a number of different situations with regards to Alexander Isak. My one sort of final question on Alexander Isak to ask you is that, you know, in your own opinion right now, where do you stand with Alexander Isak? Do you think he's got more chance of leaving Newcastle United, or do you think he's got more chance of staying at this point, in your opinion?
And Ben, just to jump in with a little extra one to add on to Pete, do you see the Liverpool option is still open? Because I'll be, you know where I'm from, Ben. I'm nervous over it. I'm not going to lie. I am nervous over it. And I hoped that this Ekitike move would have put all that to bed. But some people are suggesting that Liverpool are still interested in Isak and they take Isak as well. But is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool are interested in Isak, whether now, whether January, or whether next summer. So the interest won't go away. You don't go from saying you're going to offer 120 million pounds or more to just not being interested. But I think the kind of player Newcastle have in Isak is a long-term profile that Liverpool need. But now they've added Ekitike, they have to determine whether it's a short-term profile that they want to try and bring in now, and at a number that they see value. Because obviously, if nothing was to happen with Isak, then you assume in a year's time, with a year left of the contract, the price drops anyway. So then maybe you get him for what you want to pay now in a year's time. So I don't expect Liverpool to be reckless. But the reason why it's tough to answer that question is because Darwin Núñez is expected to leave, but clubs are struggling to meet Liverpool's valuation. And if he goes, you could say you've got Ekitike and you might need one more. Then if Luis Diaz also departs for Bayern, Liverpool will 100% add another attacker. It's just whether it's a wide attacker, a winger, or another number 9. And then what makes it a bit more complex, and it's important to obviously be sensitive about this, and as a consequence, the journalism lacks a bit of context, because we're not going around as journalists and asking about the Jota situation. We're not translating that into football terms because it's wrong. You have to be respectful, and that whole tragic situation, and condolences once again to Diogo Jota and Andre Silva and their family and their friends and the Liverpool and Wolves communities and so on. But the point is, right now, it's inappropriate, and I think, just my personal opinion, irresponsible journalism to start saying, what kind of attacker do you need? Has it changed in any way because of Diogo Jota? So I'm looking at Liverpool in a Diaz, Nunez-centric bubble because I want to be respectful. And I'm sure that clubs as well, with players that Liverpool might want and agents, are also doing the same because more time has to pass. Now, once we get towards the end of the window, Liverpool will have to understand what they need, and the outgoings that are potentially going to happen will influence that. And they'll start to think about the bigger picture as well. And they might even start to look at Mo Salah, who's not going to be there forever. Because remember, Liverpool like to replace a player before the player that they'll replace actually leaves the club. So it complicates it, because you could argue they could do with another number 9 if Nunez leaves. If Diaz goes, they'll be screaming for more of a left winger. Ekitike can play wide as well. So does that mean that he gets some time on the left and then a player like Isak comes in? And the honest truth is, right now, we don't know. And we have to be very sensitive and respectful when dealing with Liverpool sources, because maybe they don't want to talk about what they need with attackers. Maybe they don't want to go into too much detail. It was a bit easier with Ekitike because Newcastle moved. Liverpool knew they had to, otherwise they might have missed out. He's a player that's been on Liverpool's radar for quite some time. But it's much more sensitive with Diaz because Liverpool want to keep him. Diaz wants to leave. No one's met the valuation yet. Nunez was always giving preference to Napoli. They didn't meet the valuation. He could go to Saudi, but does the player want that move? Liverpool would welcome an offer from Saudi. So the simplest one for them was Ekitike, get it over the line quickly. Isak was always going to be complicated and might still be. And again, it will depend on all these moving parts that I've outlined, and we may not have the full context. And we have to be very respectful when engaging with our Liverpool sources and reporting to make sure that we appreciate this as a club grieving too. So things may take a little bit more time. And then regarding the question, will Isak leave? I mean, you'll know me by now. I'm not a journalist to be making percentages or odds guessing. If I know that Isak wants to leave, I'll report he wants to leave. If I know he's going to sign a new contract, I'll report he's going to sign a new contract. I don't think Isak or Newcastle know categorically yet, which is why we're having the fluid situation, which is why Eddie Howe's contradicted himself quite a bit pre-match and post-match. And therefore, I would advise a bit of caution on this story, because it is simultaneously true that Newcastle haven't changed their stance at the time we're live, and Liverpool haven't given up. And both of those things can be true, because during the window, stances can change, as per the Wesley Fofana story I told you. And it's really easy to swallow something said publicly by your club, but actually you often find that that public statement, even if it gets forgotten, is consistently wrong. So Brendan Rodgers said in a press conference that Chelsea couldn't even afford Wesley Fofana's left leg. And 2 weeks later, he ended up joining. Leeds United said Rafinha would not go for less than the number that Chelsea paid. 2 weeks later, they sold him to Barcelona for about 5 million less. My club, Leicester, years back, said Emir Heskey will never be sold to Liverpool. 3 weeks later, he ended up leaving. Martin O'Neill said that he was not going to leave Leicester for other rumoured gigs. 2 weeks later, he took a new job. So sometimes the club position, even if said in black and white, either changes or is a bit disingenuous, because you have to protect your position in the market. Newcastle came out there and said, we're going to sell Isak. Then suddenly you're going to get a free for all, and you're going to get a lot of clubs low-balling them. So it is not for sale now. But is it going to be not for sale at the end of the window or January or next summer? I still think that remains to be seen. And I think it's only fair to report with balance at the time. And sometimes what happens is social media takes a small quote out of what you say, and you kind of get attacked as a journalist when actually I've given you a 5 to 7 minute answer on all the finesses of Isak to try and give you the perspective of all the sources I'm speaking to on each side. And my reporting of Isak has been very consistent, that Liverpool will try, that Newcastle don't want to sell, that Liverpool haven't given up, They proved that by making an approach and saying they'd be prepared to make a bid. And I'm still not aware they've given up now, but I'm still not aware that Newcastle have told them they want to sell. Point is, in all of this, come the end of the window, something's got to give. So either Liverpool are going to walk away because they feel Ekitike is enough for now, and they believe that Newcastle's position is genuine, or Newcastle's position is going to change like Brendan Rodgers' did, in which case I would fully expect Liverpool to still make a bid. So the Isak saga isn't over, and we'll have to now understand in the next few days whether Liverpool or another suitor get any encouragement by all of these coincidences, which when you add them up, you can definitely tell a story of a player whose head has been turned. But with respect to Newcastle, they're counter-arguing that there's a reason for each thing. So he wasn't in the preseason. It was always the plan. He wasn't in the stands. It was to protect him from cameras. He wasn't in training because he had a thigh injury. Add all of that up, it doesn't look great. It would be very easy for a Liverpool fan to tell a story painting a picture of an unsettled Isak, but that's simply not what Newcastle argue. And that's kind of where we're at with the saga.
Ben, it's been a pleasure. I know you've been a little bit longer than anticipated, but we always value your input and your knowledge on all things Newcastle United and what's going on in the world of football and transfers. So thank you so much for taking the time. Hopefully we'll be able to get you back on again sometime down the road in transfer window. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about more about Isak and potentially staying at Newcastle United, which we hope.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I still think one thing I was going to add is it might feel like a slow window for Newcastle and to some extent a disappointing one. But like I kind of said on previous shows, this project needs back to back to back of everything, back to back to back of Champions League, back to back to back, hopefully, of trophies, because that's when you start budgeting at the same level as your football ambition. Whereas if you get it and don't get it and get it and don't get it, then you have a problem financially when competing with the big six. And it's sort of a backhanded compliment to Newcastle that they're missing out on some of these targets, because it shows they've elevated the type of player they want to be in the same conversation as some of the biggest clubs in the world. And I think when you do that, you always stand a chance of missing out, but particularly for Newcastle at this stage of the project. And by that, very clearly, so people don't take it out of context, what I mean is, coming back to my first point, until you get back to back to back, you can't budget back to back to back, which means that your wage bill is lower, your bonuses are lower, your income is lower, your sponsorship is lower. Look at Chelsea missing out on Champions League football. They couldn't tie down a front of shirt for what they're looking for. Now they've won the Club World Cup. They might get 55 or 60 million a year. So why is that important in all of this? Because at the end of the day, there's plenty of these players that Newcastle have missed out on that were open to Newcastle. But the difference is the Newcastle wage structure is significantly less than the clubs they're competing with. And if you had two great job offers, in this case, both with Champions League football, both in a country where you want to live, and one said, I'm going to give you 250k, and one said, I can only give you 150k, then which one would you pick? And I think that can be the deciding factor. So I don't think they've always lost out just because players have gone, I don't want Newcastle, I only want the other club. I think they've also lost out because they can't suddenly increase this wage bill to 200, 250, 300,000. Even Man United can do that if they wish. Certainly Chelsea can do that. Definitely Arsenal can do that. And when you're faced with that, the only way of upping that wage bill and structure and paying a bit more on the player side is to feel like it's going to be offset by things like regular Champions League money. And if you gamble on doing that, and then next season you don't get Champions League football, you're in big, big trouble, because that £250,000 a week player is going to turn around and go, now you haven't got Champions League football, maybe I'm unhappy. Or Newcastle are going to turn around and go, if we don't get Champions League football back, we can't afford this player in the long run, so we've got to offload him. And you put yourself in a financial bind. So it's not only about PSR, it's about Newcastle being a sustainable model. And when I said the project was streaky, and again, that got misquoted, what I meant was They've gone from second bottom in the table under this ownership to Champions League football, to out of Champions League football at the halfway stage of that following season, to no Champions League football or European football because Man United won the FA Cup, to back to Champions League football. If they don't back that up with Champions League football again, you can understand why, from a budgetary point of view, it's seen as streaky. So you have to plan without European football, because when you budget in football, you're extremely pessimistic. Every club is, because if you're too optimistic with your budgetary projections and you don't miss them, you're in trouble. So Newcastle's football aim is sky high. Their expectations are sky high, but their financial goals and projections are very low, simply because they can't take an undue risk. And only when they get back to back to back to the point where you can say it feels a bit more reliable that Newcastle are going to get Champions League or European football season on season, only then might they say, let's start paying a big six kind of wage. So people often say, but isn't PSR designed to protect the big six? Isn't PSR designed to allow them to spend and nobody else? Why can Chelsea sell their women's team to their parent company and Newcastle can't? Well, firstly, Newcastle could if they create that kind of structure. Nobody's stopping people replicating Chelsea, as Aston Villa showed. But the second thing in all of this is that these big six clubs predominantly have earned, through their history and consistency of trophies, the ability to pay that wage, offset by income, offset by academy, offset by sponsorship. So if you think about this Newcastle project under PIF, it's still formative. It's not even 5 seasons old. And as a consequence, until they show back to back to back, they're not going to be able to compete financially with wage bill, because it would be reckless, to be perfectly honest with you. It might be one thing doing it with one player, but then every other player that comes through the door is going to say, well, if he's on 250, I better at least be on 200. And then every player you've got at the football club that's on 150 is going to say, I want 200. And before you know it, you've got an unsustainable wage bill. So I think Newcastle are showing ambition. But if you think of this as window one of ambition, because now they think they're in the next phase of their project, it may take 2 or 3 windows or even 2 or 3 seasons for them to really start winning more races than they lose when they're competing against other big clubs, simply because of that point I made, that every single one of these rivals, Man City for James Trafford, Chelsea for João Pedro, and so on, they can all offer 75, 100k potentially more than Newcastle are prepared or willing to do. And I think that makes a big difference. But hopefully we get to the point where Newcastle back up last season. And then I think every summer that they back it up, they'll be stronger and stronger and stronger. And then they'll likely win more of these type of races for elite Premier League and European players than they're losing. Whereas unfortunately right now they've tried for 6 or 7 and they've walked away from most of them empty-handed.
Yeah. And it's been frustrating for us. You know, we've been talking about it on the channel. Has been a very frustrating summer. But the points that you've made as to why we're in this case, I mean, one or two in the chat have said, you know, we know this in a little bit about what you've said, but actually there's a lot of fans that don't know this. And sometimes a lot of fans do forget that this is the situation that Newcastle United are in right now. We talked about it on Sunday, Chris, about the situation that we're currently in with Newcastle United. And, you know, do we need to reevaluate our targets and who we're going for this summer because of the fact of the hierarchy of the teams that we're up against, challenging for the likes of Ekitike, João Pedro, Mateus Cunha, etc. And this is the situation that we're in. So it's really good to hear your perspective on that and actually confirm what we've both said and Daz as well on this channel as well. So as always, Ben, fantastic perspective on all things Newcastle United. Hopefully we see some tweets from you tomorrow giving us a little bit more information about Yoane Wissa, because Newcastle United fans are getting a bit excited about it.
I'll do my best. I mean, someone will come in. And actually, the new technical director is a top hire. The Elanga signing is very smart. And I think that it's very easy for clubs to judge their windows by missing out on a target or by just seeing other clubs move a bit faster. But ultimately, if you get your player in by game 1 of the Premier League season, or in a worst case scenario, by the end of the window, people forget about the timescales. So there's still time for Newcastle. there is money to spend. That's the other encouraging thing. Remember, 12 months ago, we were in a situation where they almost sold Anthony Gordon to Liverpool. Then at the last minute, Elliot Anderson moved to Forest, not Purvis Estupiñán, Kuba Minter moved to Brighton. And those two added up to stop Newcastle having to sanction the Gordon sale to Liverpool. So anyone that suggests that Newcastle haven't made progress financially or as a project needs to look at this fast upward curve where they were in relegation trouble and they were going to clubs like Burnley to make signings to try and fight to stay up without any real excitement at that point, because there was a lot of money by the owners, but it was all doom and gloom. And then flash forwards a season, you get Champions League. Flash forwards another season, technically they finished in a European position, which is still not terrible, but they got bumped out of it. And then flash forwards again, and they win a first domestic trophy in donkey's years, and they get Champions League football, all with less finances than many of the sides around them in that race for a top 4 or top 5 finish. Now this window, suddenly they're shooting for players with big 6 sides as opposed to getting players that might get them out of relegation. And that's a very small period of time, you know? So if this trajectory continues, I think the future will be very bright for Newcastle, regardless of PSR. And it is kind of easy to sort of feel like somehow the gloss has been taken off Champions League football because people are chasing after Isak and because maybe they're not getting the targets they want. But I still think that the fact they're going for that caliber of targets is a sign of the ambition of this project. And if they don't get them this summer, let's see what happens in January or next summer and January or the summer afterwards. And weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, perhaps it's logical, the PIF side of the club basically taking their Saudi Vision 2030 and saying Newcastle 2030. So their expectation is that this club is going to be dominant. This club is going to be regular in the Champions League. This club is going to be challenging for honours season on season. And they want that for 29-30. And that was always the original plan, even on day one when the team were floundering and looked like they might get relegated. So this project is really a head-on strategy or track. It's just behind this summer because they've had a few deals hijacked. But I really don't think it's all doom and gloom for Newcastle. And I still expect come the end of the window, them to have had a very productive summer.
I know I'm about to let you go, but you just touched on something that I just wanted to ask on really quickly, because you talked about that vision of 29-30. A lot of Newcastle fans at the moment are questioning, and we've talked about it on this channel as well, about the long-term vision of PIF. Are they here for the long term? Are they here for the long haul? Do they want the club to be sustainable in the long term with them at the helm? Is that something that you believe then?
Yeah, I have no indication that PIF want to leave. In fact, it was the opposite when Amanda Staveley left. After about a year, the plan was always to slowly dissolve her shares and subsume it between PIF and the Rubin brothers. So they remain fully committed. I still think that at some point in the coming years, Newcastle will end up in some form of multi-club model. I think that PIF will look at other clubs potentially outside of England. We constantly hear rumours with France in particular, but they've never followed through there. And PIF have got so many subsidiaries that as they structure their sports investment, they can do it in lots of different ways, shapes and forms. So I've never heard that they want to sell up. I don't see why they would, because the return on investment is strong. People forget that they bought the club in the end off Mike Ashley for about £305 million. So whether things succeed or fail, that valuation has already gone up. And even if you factor in the money invested into the club on things like signings and infrastructure, I'd be very surprised if they don't think that this club valuation is going to rise and rise and rise. Some people in the industry say if Everton was about 350 with the debt, and Ipswich Town is on the market at the moment in the Championship for 325 million. So there are people that already believe that Newcastle is a £1 billion club in terms of the valuation. And if that is accurate, then they've tripled their money in less than 5 years. And if it's growing that fast and you aspire to be a Big Six club, what are Big Six clubs valued at? Most of them are between 2 billion and 4.5 billion. If you're looking at offers or valuations for anybody ranging from Tottenham all the way through to Manchester United. So I think if Newcastle aspire to be a big six, or call it big seven with Newcastle, then factored into that will be the fact that their belief is if they genuinely have that title, the price of the club will match that. So if you leave now, you're leaving at $1 billion. If you stick it out until 2030, you might have a $2 billion club. And if you do want to bring in a strategic partner or get a return on investment, you can. So I think this is their feeling. They're in it for the long haul. I've never been given any indication that PIF want to sell up, that they're done with Newcastle. And when you think about a Saudi World Cup and a Vision 2030, to abandon a globally known brand that's on the up would be a very strange decision. So if they do suddenly sell up, then I would be very surprised. And I haven't heard anything to that nature.
Great to hear, Ben. Yeah, it was important to have that sort of last question there, because it's on the tongues of a lot of Newcastle United fans at the moment. So appreciate you kind of giving your thoughts and opinions on that situation. Ben, I am going to let you go. You've stayed a lot longer than we anticipated, but we absolutely appreciate it. We love the conversation with you on all things Newcastle United. So yeah,
cheers, guys. Keep up the good work. Look forward to
having you back soon.
Take care. Bye.
Mate.
Thank you, Ben.
Great to have Ben on. People that are joined later, hold on a second. I saw a comment earlier. We've got nearly 900 in the chat, and we've only got just under 300 likes. Come on, people, get those likes up. It only takes a second, but it means the world to us. Get them done. But yeah, brilliant conversation with Ben. Just for people that have come in later on in Ben's conversation, he was only scheduled to be here for 15 minutes because he's so busy with various other shows and appearances on other clubs' channels that actually we ended up getting the best part of 50 odd minutes out of him, which is fantastic. And lots of great stuff on there, loads of stuff about Yoane Wissa and that situation. I'll get Chris's thoughts and opinions on that very shortly. We also got the Isak conversation. We had a long discussion about that, giving his perspective on Alexander Isak, and of course then about PIF and their long-term future. So 3 really big topics, Chris, that we've managed to cover tonight, which has been excellent. But look, I want to get your perspective on this, because we've gone through 52 minutes. We haven't even talked about our own opinions around the news that Ben Jacobs talked about just earlier in the show, and that's the fact that we could potentially see this Yoane Wissa wearing the black and white. David Ornstein put his information out. He thought that we were exploring the deal. Then it was a case that the deal had been rejected, but we're going back into more. We've had like Keith on there, Craig Hope and Keith Downey with their opinions on the Wissa deal. But what's your opinion, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I was, well, you could probably tell from the way I questioned Ben, but I was a little bit frustrated when I saw the news that we'd gone in with a 25 million bid. Now Ben said it's verbal at this point. It seems to be a popular thing this transfer window, doesn't it? Let's just go in with a verbal offer. Let's not put in a written offer. But yeah, I was a little bit frustrated because a little bit excited in the sense that I from reports I've heard recently, I believe that it was around 50 million. So when I saw the 25 million, I thought, oh, okay, maybe a lot lower than that, which was good. But then on the other hand, as soon as it was dismissed out of hand and, rejected very, very quickly, the frustration started kicking in again, because I get where Ben was coming from in terms of, you start low and then you build up rather than starting too high and then have to keep keeping up. But we've seen this throughout the window, haven't we? And it's almost a bit like, I want us to just go in and go, how much do you want? Right, okay. And then maybe go a touch lower and negotiate from there. But it feels like we go in at our level, and it's a bit like, our level feels a bit unrealistic at times, particularly this transfer window. So there was a bit of frustration there, I've got to be honest. But yeah, I think Yoane Wissa's growing on me. I said a while back, didn't I, Pete, that for me, 50 million is far too much, in my opinion, for a 28-year-old. However, if you're talking more in the 30, 35, 40 even bracket, for the player who scored 19 goals last season, I hadn't realised it was 19 goals with no penalties, which makes it even more impressive. That would be a really, really good signing. And I think when we were linked with Hugo Ekitike, which I was very excited about, Hugo Ekitike was a player who I was excited to see come into Newcastle United, and I knew that he could possibly play left wing, but chances are he would probably play more centrally. And then I thought maybe we're going to change shape. Whereas with Yoane Wissa, I do see Yoane Wissa as a very, very capable understudy to Alexander Isak. So it means that we maintain our shape, but we're getting in a very, very good understudy, somebody who could come in and you wouldn't hear groans around the stadium, oh, Yoane Vissa's coming on. It would kind of be like, okay, fair enough. And I think if you're getting them at such a reasonable price as well, which then frees up money to be spent elsewhere within the squad, I think it's exciting. So I'm encouraged by the Yoane Wissa talk. However, I am trying to hold myself back a little bit because I've seen our fingers been burned, 5, possibly 6 times already this window. So I'm not going to get too excited. But Yoane Wissa is growing on me. And I think if we were to do a deal anywhere between 30 and 40 million, I think it'd be a shrewd deal. But what about you, Pete?
I'm always excited about a potential signing. You know me, man. We've known each other long enough now. I'm always getting excited about a potential signing. People on socials and people in the chat will know me if you've been watching the channel long enough. I'm excited about this deal. I think he's a really good player. I think he will fit Newcastle United's mould as an alternative or someone that can play in the same team as Alexander Isak. I think it's a really shrewd signing. I get and understand the concern with regards to his age. He is going to be 29 in September. I get that. But for me, and I've said it on many shows previous in the last few days and weeks, that sometimes you have to buy a player for now. Sometimes you need to get a player in that's ready to go with experience and being able to go and play now. We did it in our first transfer window with the likes of Kieran Trippier and Dan Burn, who were experienced players. We got them in because we needed it at that point. I think, in my opinion, Chris, that we need that experience now. We need someone that's a little bit older, a little bit wiser, someone that's got the ability to come into the team and be the main guy now. And it might be the main guy coming off the bench and making the difference. It might be the main guy that plays all the cup games and FA Cup games. He might be the main guy that starts in the Premier League because Alexander Isak's playing the games in the Champions League, or vice versa, who knows. But we need someone that we can trust to come in and do the job. We knew, as much as we love Callum Wilson, we couldn't necessarily trust him because of his fitness situation. Yoane Wissa is not quite that. And the one thing that we tend to forget in all this conversation about Yoane Wissa is this, Chris, and I found this earlier. Saw it on social, so I'll put it on the screen.
Oh, yeah, go on.
And it's this right here. So if you take that comment away, if we are to sign Yoane Wissa, we're getting, or we will have, 2 of the top 6 goal scorers this season in our team. And you can already see that Brentford had 2 of them in the top 6 because Brian Mbeumo had 20 and Yoane Wissa scored 19. Now, what you're doing there is you're adding that potential to Newcastle United. So not only have we got someone like Alexander Isak who scored 23 goals, but if you look down the rest of our team last season, there was not many. I think it might have been Jacob Murphy that might have been second top goal scorer, or Harvey Barnes just behind him. There were nowhere near the numbers that Yoane Wissa got. Now, if we can add another striker that can offer that amount of goals right there, you're looking at 40 plus goals between those 2 that could be a potential next season. That excites me. We haven't had that since, funnily enough, when we finished 4th and we had Callum Wilson getting 18 and Alexander Isak getting what? Did he get 10, 11 or 12 goals? We had 2 viable strikers that could put the ball in the net. What we're getting there is what we had a few years ago, and we're getting that back into the team. So that's what excites me as well about the potential of getting that guy in. Now, Yoane Wissa might only have 3 or 4 years at the club, but there could be 3 or 4 years that could come to fruition. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say, mate, as well, if you bring that graphic back up, it kind of leads into the point I made earlier. Mohamed Salah, Alexander Isak, Erling Haaland, Chris Woods, Brian Mbeumo, they all took penalties. Yoane Wissa didn't take any penalties. So you could argue, if you took the penalties from all of those players, how many goals? So it's another factor, isn't it, which makes the goal return even more impressive.
Absolutely. Great point as well. And so, all of those things, I think the only real thing when it boils down to it that people have concerns about is age. But for me, I don't see that as too much of a negative. I see that you've got an experienced player there that can come in and make a difference, and that's what excites me. But you're right to be have that little bit of concern, a little bit of question marks, because we have, as you use the words quite rightly, we have been burnt before in thinking that a player's coming. It was only last week, probably this time last week, we were all buzzing and excited with Ekitike coming in. It didn't quite work out. I'm more hopeful that this can work out, and I think Ben Jacobs tonight filled me with more confidence about this deal than anything else. And it was in particular about the talk of Tottenham. So Tottenham, yes, may well be at the table. They haven't bid yet, but the confidence or the situation around Yoane Wissa saying basically that he's very happy going to either team, and Newcastle United are well in play right now because they're the only ones that have put the bid in. But also looking at Tottenham's team and thinking, is there really anywhere for him to fit in this team? That's also a big question mark on him moving to Tottenham, and actually a nice little tick there for a potential of Newcastle United. Because I think, if he gets around the table with Eddie Howe, I think he signs for Newcastle United, because he'll be able to see the vision. He'll be able to see where he fits in. And I think there's more of a distinctive position for Yoane Wissa at Newcastle United than there is for Tottenham. So that's kind of where I am with that. But there was one other topic just before we finished, Chris, that I wanted to come to, and it was in relation to this man, Christopher Nkunku. Sorry, he has been linked with a move to Newcastle United. Now, it was reported through Chelsea accounts that they have a particular reporter that's reported on the fact that Newcastle are interested in Christopher Nkunku. It's also been touched on by NUFC blog, and interestingly, Chris, get your thoughts on this. Not just Nkunku, but Trevor Chalobah has also been linked with Newcastle United. The player that you talked about a while back is someone that could potentially come to Newcastle United. So, first of all, Christian Nkunku, there's been lots of mixed feelings on this particular report of the link with him. He's definitely going to be available. Chelsea want rid of him. Would you take him? Would you be happy with him potentially coming to Newcastle United?
Do you know what? I wouldn't be opposed to someone like Christopher Nkunku coming in, because I think there's clearly a talented player there. Obviously, I think it was Leipzig, wasn't it? He came from really, really good reputation at Leipzig, and it didn't quite work out for him at Chelsea. But I always give players that, I give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to someone like Chelsea, because nobody has a club or a squad like Chelsea. Yeah. So it's unusual circumstances. The only thing that makes me kind of doubt the deal as such is the fact that he's on really high wages from what I've heard. Now that could be an issue. Whether or not we would be able to kind of negotiate that, whether we'd be able to kind of tempt him down a little bit, I don't know. The exciting thing about the Christopher Nkunku deal is the fact that I think we get him for a really reasonable price. I could be wrong, Pete, but I think it was somewhere between 50 and 60 million they paid for Nkunku.
It was a lot. It was an expensive deal.
Yeah, and I think you could probably get Christopher Nkunku because they're dying to get him off the wage bill. I think you could probably get him somewhere between 35 and 40 because they just want rid of him. So in terms of the monetary value of purchasing the player, yeah, brilliant. The only doubt for me is the wages, and it's whether or not Christopher Nkunku wants to, has he got the drive and determination to go and prove himself? Is he that type of player, or will he just want to kind of, go to La Liga or go back to the Bundesliga or maybe go to Serie A, where he may be able to retain those wages? I don't know. It's whether or not he's that interested in proving himself in the Premier League. But if he's available and if he's interested, I think he'd be a decent signing, because we know Christopher Nkunku he's got the qualities, and I think Eddie Howe can help bring them out. It's just whether or not the wages would be a stumbling block. That's the only thing that worries me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. Initially, I would have said I'm not quite sure on him, his injury record, this, that, and the other. But I've heard from a Chelsea fan that actually he's been fit for most of this season, and he's just pretty much been playing here and there, mostly in the Europa Conference League. So that's why a lot of fans haven't seen a lot of him, because he didn't really play many Premier League games. But look, if we're going on Leipzig ability, we'll be getting a very, very talented player there. And, you know, it goes back to the situation, and you've touched on it before many a time. A player coming in, you always know that Eddie Howe will...
We're going down this route now, aren't we? We're going down this route. And who was it who started this? Who was it who started? It wasn't Ivo, was it?
No, it was... oh, my God, I forgot his name. I forgot his name.
Darth by Design?
No, it was somebody else. And I can't remember. It's gonna annoy me, and it's gonna come back.
Dennis No.
That's the one. Yeah,
it was Dennis No. It was Dennis No. All this talk.
Everyone's at it now. Everyone's at it. But look, I'm glad that many are excited about this deal, and the wages are an issue. Tino, you're absolutely right. But you know, is he going to get those wages anywhere else with the situation that he's in, and the fact that he probably just wants to play? Maybe those wages can be negotiated down. Now, for me, I would be looking at potentially getting him in, and not just us, but I think anyone that's getting him is probably going to get him on loan with an option or an obligation. Yeah, I think that would be a fair deal for someone of his ability. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Clonad. I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I think that would be a fair way of getting someone like him in. I think 40 million is probably his high top end price point. Just this is my opinion. My evaluations are different to other people's, but I wouldn't be against that. But yeah, he ain't getting that wages anywhere else. There's no way. There's no way. But we'll see. We'll see on that one. But it's an interesting link, one to keep an eye on. I'm sure we'll be discussing it in the shows to come. So Christian Nkunku might be one that we keep on sort of in the back of our minds for future shows. But look, ultimately, you know, Yoane Wissa will be the target. If Yoane Wissa comes in, maybe Nkunku might not be the option, or do we use him in more of a number 10, a different type of position? Who knows? Oh my God. It might have been that person that you referred to. We do have a super chat here from Novo. Great to have you with us, Novo, as always. Congrats on the 30k, lads. And if people haven't realized, we did hit 30k on the show the other night on Sunday night. Great achievement. Really, really proud of everything that we've achieved, and so happy to have you all with us to celebrate that. He said, Ben's always a great guest, and he absolutely is. We need to get moving. No more rallying or dallying. This is how much we'll pay. Yes, no, then move on. Squad needs re-energizing with a raft of new faces, and they need time to edify. I like that word, edify. That's
totally.
Agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Novo always on the button. Completely agree with that statement. Yeah, but we need to go in with our offers, and if we're not getting anywhere, we've decided that's where we're drawing the line. Just move on. Just move on quickly. A bit like what we were saying the other day, but completely agree with what Novo's saying there. I'm very sorry to everyone in the chat. I was making a note of all the questions, but we ended up with like 29. And unfortunately, fortunately, Ben could stay longer with us, which was absolutely great. But it just meant that we had limited time then, obviously, to do some questions. But I do want to point out another super chat that came in. Big thank you to Big Tank 9401. Thank you very much. And Big Tank says 2 of the best 6 scorers and 2 of the fastest wings. I think he's talking about the picture, doesn't he? So yeah, absolutely, Big Tank, absolutely.
Great point.
Yeah, really good point. And finally, I also wanted to mention, and these come from members. So we've got Nick Allison, who's been a member for 2 years. Thank you very much, Nick. This is a good player, but why not try for Kolo Muani over them? And we've discussed Kolo Muani, haven't we? We have. And the rumours about Kolo Muani have increased a little bit over the last 48 hours. So who knows? Who knows, Nick? You could be onto something. And then Munch, who's been a member for 33 months. Again, thank you very much, Munch. He says, Ben always leaves you with more questions. And yeah, sometimes he does, because he gets your mind working, doesn't he? And he starts making you think about things. But we always enjoy getting Ben Jacobs on. It's always great to have insight, from those people who are in the know, those people who have the contacts. And Ben is always very generous with his time on Loaded Mag, and we really do appreciate it. So it's always a pleasure to have Ben on. But no, big thank you, Munch, obviously for being a member for 33 months. Thank you for your comment.
People, that is it. We're done. We're out of here. Thank you so much for taking your time. Make sure you give those likes on the way out. Let's get those likes up. We got over 300. We're about 350 right now. Let's get us up to 400 likes. Thank you so much for everyone that's tuned in tonight. Unfortunately, Daz couldn't make it because I think he's probably on the transfer to his hotel at the moment and getting him and his family settled in, ready for a week of sun whilst we sit here in a week of rain. But hopefully we'll all be able to smile with a signing coming through the door. People, we're out of here. You guys take care, and we're going to see you out with our number 14, who will be here. Come on, people. Get it.